Chapter 3 From the Garvin County Sun Tribune, May 3rd, 2008. Reporter Angela Dash. Jeff Hicks, 15. As a freshman, Hicks would have ordinarily not been walking through the Commons, according to some students. "We don't go there if we can help it," freshman Marcy Stindler told reporters. "The seniors hassle us if we go down there." It's sort of like an unwritten freshman rule to stay away from the Commons, except during lunch. Every incoming freshman knows that. But Hicks was running late on the morning of May 2nd, and cut through the Commons in his hurry to get to class, which some are calling a classic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He suffered a shot to the back of the head and died instantly at the scene. A memorial has been set up in his name at Garvin County State Bank. Police say it's unclear whether LaVille knew Hicks or if Hicks was accidentally hit by a bullet intended for someone else. Because Mrs. Tate had kept me in her office for so long, I missed the first period bell and walked in right in the middle of Mrs. Tennill's first day of school speech. I know Tate had done it to keep me from having to brave the pre-first period hallways, but I almost would have preferred that to the eyes boring into me while I walked into class. At least in the hallways, I could sort of walk in the shadows. I opened the door, and I swear the entire class stopped what they were doing and looked up at me. Billy Jenkins dropped his pencil and just let it roll off his desk. Mandy Horn's mouth flopped open so hard I thought I heard her jaw crack. Even Mrs. Tennell stopped talking and stood motionless for a few seconds. I stood in the doorway, wondering if it would really be all that noticeable if I just turned around and walked out. Out of the classroom, out of the school, back home to bed. Tell Mom and Dr. Heeler that I was wrong, that I wanted to finish high school with a tutor after all, that I wasn't as strong as I originally thought. Mrs. Tennell cleared her throat and put down the marker she was using on the whiteboard. I took a deep breath and shuffled to her desk, holding out the hall pass Mrs. Tate's secretary had given me on the way out. "We're just going over this year's syllabus," Mrs. Tennell said, taking the pass. Her face remained stone-like. "Go ahead and take your seat. If you have any questions on something we've already covered, you can ask me after the bell." I stared at her for a beat longer. Mrs. Tennell had hardly been one of my fans to begin with. She always had a problem with the fact that I wouldn't participate in labs, and with the fact that Nick sort of accidentally set fire to a test tube in third period once. I can't even count how many times she'd landed Nick's butt in detention, and she'd always glared at me when I loitered on the sidewalk in front of the school waiting for him to get out. I couldn't imagine what she must feel for me now. Pity, maybe, for not seeing in Nick what she always saw. Did she want to shake me and shout, "I told you so, you stupid girl"? Or maybe she felt loathing for what happened with Mr. Klein. Maybe she, like me, replayed that scene over and over in her head a million times a day. Mr. Klein, the chemistry teacher, using his body to literally shield about a dozen students. He was crying, snot running out of his nose, body shaking. He had his arms held out to each side, Christ-like, and was shaking his head at Nick, defiant and scared. I liked Klein. Everybody liked Klein. Klein was the kind of guy who'd come to your graduation party. The kind of guy who'd stop and talk to you in the mall, and none of that, "Hello, youngster," Mr. Angerson, the principal, kind of crap either. Klein would say, "Hey, what's up? Keeping your nose clean?" Klein would turn a blind eye if he saw you sneak a beer at a restaurant and get away with it. Klein would give his life for you. We always kind of knew that about Klein. Now the whole world knew that about him. Thanks to the impressive TV coverage of the shooting and that annoying Angela Dash writing for the Sun Tribune, pretty much everyone in the world knew that Mr. Klein had died because he wouldn't tell Nick where Mrs. Tennell was. So I suppose it wasn't news to Mrs. Tennell. I also suppose that's why she looked at me like I was a plague set free in her classroom. I turned and scuffed to an empty chair. I tried to keep my eyes rooted solely to the chair, but found it was impossible. I swallowed. My throat felt too thick. My hands were so sweaty my notebook was slipping out. My leg throbbed, and I felt myself limping and silently cursed myself for doing it. I curled into my desk and looked up at Mrs. Tennell. She stared at me until I was settled, and then turned back to the whiteboard, clearing her throat again and finishing writing her email address on the board. Slowly, the heads of my classmates turned back toward the front of the room, and I felt myself begin to breathe once again. 83, I chanted in my head. 82 if you don't count today. While Tanil talked about the best ways to contact her, I concentrated on my hands, trying to slow my breathing the way Dr. Healer had taught me to do. I stared at my nails, which were chipped and ugly. I'd never found the energy to file them smooth, and now I was oddly self-conscious about them. All the other girls would have prepared for the first day of school by doing things like painting their nails, picking out their best clothes. I'd barely even washed. It was just another way that I was different from all of them. And somehow, oddly, it was just another way that I was different from the way I used to be. I tucked my nails into my palms. I didn't want them to show, afraid that someone would notice how ugly they were, but found myself strangely calmed by the feeling of them jabbing jaggedly into my palms. I lowered my hands to my lap and made hard fists, squeezing into the nails dug into my palms, and I could take a breath without a wave of nausea rolling over me. "Email me any time you have a question," Mrs. Tanil was saying, pointing to what she'd written on the board, and then she stopped short. There was some commotion going on to my left. The kids were rustling around, one girl stuffing books and papers into her backpack quietly. Tears were streaking down her face, and she was hiccuping, trying to keep it inside. A few other girls were hovering over her, rubbing her back and talking to her. "Is there a problem?" Mrs. Tanil asked. "Kelsey? Megan? Is there a reason you're not in your chairs?" "It's Ginny," Megan said, pointing at the crying girl, who I now realized was Ginny Baker. I'd heard on the news about all the plastic surgery she'd had, but hadn't really realized how much it had changed her face until now. Mrs. Tanil placed a dry erase marker into the tray at the bottom of the board, then quietly and steadily folded her hands in front of her. "Ginny," she said in a voice so soft I wasn't sure at first it had come out to me. "Is there something I can do to help? Do you need to go get a drink, maybe?" Ginny zipped her backpack and stood. Her whole body was shaking. "It's her," she said without moving. Everyone knew who she was talking about, though, and they all turned to look at me. Even Tanil glanced in my direction. I put my face back down toward my hands and squeezed my fingernails into my palms even harder. I sucked my lips inside my mouth and bit down on them hard from the inside, clamping them shut. I can't sit here with her without thinking about... She sucked in a breath and then let it out with a stream of anguish that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Why did they let her come back? She grabbed her backpack with both hands in front of her, hugged it to her belly, and rushed up the aisle, pushing both Megan and Kelsey backward into depths. Mrs. Tanil took a couple steps toward her and stopped. She nodded slightly, and Ginny rushed out of the room, her contorted and ragged face pulled up into a grimace. Everything was completely still for a minute, and I squeezed my eyes shut and silently counted backward from 50. Another one of those coping methods I learned. From Mom or Dr. Healer, I couldn't remember. I heard bells in my ears and I felt twitchy. Should I leave too? Go after Ginny? Tell her I'm sorry? Go home and never come back? Should I say something to the class? What do I do? Finally, Mrs. Tanil cleared her throat again, turned back to the whiteboard, and picked up her marker. Her face looked unsettled, but her manner remained stoic. Good old Stay Tanil. Couldn't charm her nor faze her. "As I was saying," she began, and then she launched back into her lecture. I blinked away the little white lights that were dancing in front of my eyes and tried to focus on what she was saying, which was hard because pretty much nobody stopped staring at me. "The next unit will focus on..." There was more restlessness, and once again she turned and stopped. I glanced to my left and saw a couple kids talking heatedly among each other. "Class," Mrs. Tanil said, her voice still stern but losing its grip on authoritative. "May I have your attention now, please?" The kids stopped talking but remained restless. I would like to get on with this so we don't fall behind before the year even begins. Sean McDanon raised his hand. Yes, Sean? She said, a little exasperation creeping into her voice. Sean coughed into his fist the way some men do when they want to change their voices from regular to super powerful and manly. He looked at me, then looked away quickly. I tried a weak smile, but it was wasted, because he'd already turned back. Sean was an okay kid, never a problem with anyone. Nobody really liked or hated him. He sort of flew under the radar most of the time, which can sometimes be the difference between getting along in high school and getting picked on in high school. He didn't get picked on that I ever knew about. He got good grades, joined academic clubs, kept his nose clean, had an unassuming girlfriend, and he lived about 6 houses down from me, which meant we played together as kids. We hadn't really talked much since about 5th grade, but there was no hostility between us. We said hi to each other if we passed in the hallway or at the bus stop. No big deal. Mrs. Tennell? Mrs. Tate told us that we should talk about these things, and it's not fair that Ginny should have to be the one to lead, said Megan, while Sean had been pointedly not looking at me ever since that first glance. Megan made an effort to swing her head around and glare at me. It's not like Ginny did anything wrong. Mrs. Tennell twisted the dry erase marker between her hands. Nobody asked Ginny to leave, Megan, and I'm sure Mrs. Tate meant that you could come up to her office to talk about these. No, said a voice at the desk behind me. It sounded like Alex Gold, but my body felt frozen and I couldn't turn my head to be sure. My fingernails dug deeper into my palms, leaving painful purple crescents across them. No. When the school had that trauma guy here, he told us we should feel free to talk about stuff whenever we need to. Not that I need to or anything. I'm so over this. Megan rolled her eyes and shifted her hateful stare from me to a spot over my shoulder. Well, good for you. But you didn't have your face blown off. Well, maybe that's because I never ticked off Nick LaVille. Okay, that's really enough, said Mrs. Tennell, but by then the conversation had gotten well out of control. Maybe we should get back to our discussion. Neither did you, Megan, Susan Grayson said, saying just Megan's right. Your face didn't get blown off either. You weren't even really friends with Ginny before the shooting. You just liked the drama. And that's basically when all hell broke loose. So many kids were talking on top of one another, it was almost impossible to tell who was saying what. All a bunch of drama? My friend died. Not like Valerie shot anybody anyway. She just had Nick do it. And Nick's dead, so who cares? Mrs. Tate said arguing wouldn't solve. Bad enough that I have to have nightmares every night about it. But to come to class and... You saying I like that Ginny got shot because it was good drama? Are you seriously saying that? Had been nice to Nick, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Isn't that the whole point of... Ask me? He deserved to die. I'm glad he's gone. What do you know about friends, anyway, you loser? It was kind of weird because eventually they were all so busy hating each other, they forgot about hating me. Nobody was looking at me. Mrs. Tennell had even sunk into the chair behind her desk and was just silently staring out the window, her fingers playing around her collar, her chin quivering just a little. To hear the reporters on TV tell it, these guys were sitting around in the cafeteria holding hands and singing Give Peace a Chance every day. But it wasn't like that at all. They were at one another's throats. All the old rivalries, the old jokes, the old sour feelings were right there, festering under the plastic surgery, in sympathetic head nods and crumpled Kleenex. Finally, my neck seemed to loosen, and I felt able to look around, really look around, at the kids who were yelling and waving their arms. A couple crying, a couple laughing.